I'll just go ahead and get started and ask why fracking?
Why fracking? Um, well, I have to say, when I first found out about fracking, I don't know, a couple of years ago, my immediate thought was, well, we probably need this gas, don't we? And then when I started to look into it, not only did I find out that we don't need the gas, but actually it's the most crazy, destructive, irreversible thing that something has to be done about. So I don't know. I decided to put some of my professional work on hold and to devote a lot of my time to trying to do something about it.
And in that same vein, talk a little bit about the fracking fight in the UK. Here we cover, in this show, we cover a lot of what's happening with export facilities, the pipelines, donations and corruptions, agencies like FERC. Is it the same story in England? Because typically, like, Americans view any European country as having far more regulation and far more oversight with something like fracking.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and I think obviously, in the US, you've led the world in fracking. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but certainly, I think for this administration and the one before it, they saw fracking and shale gas as being a big boom industry that would help the economy, and they liked what they saw in the US, and then what they did is they had a lot of meetings with US companies, people like Halliburton and stuff over here, and looked at the legislation that needed to change in order to give a smooth ride for the frackers. And then they slowly set about changing all the legislation, reducing the regulation, spinning all kinds of PR stories about how they're doing the opposite of what they're actually doing. And setting all the groundwork up so that they can go ahead and do that. You see, in the US, you have different laws with regard to mineral rights. When you have property in some states over there and stuff, you automatically have the mineral rights. So for some people in the United States, it looks like a good deal because they're going to get some kind of payback or payoff from whatever gas is produced. In the UK, you traditionally don't own the mineral rights, but people cannot just come onto your land or even underneath your land from a neighbouring property without uh, having your permission. And if they did so without your permission, they could have been sued under our trespass laws. So what they did was they changed the trespass laws so that now they don't have to have the landowner's permission. They've been changing all kinds of laws and regulations over here in order to pave the way for it. And at each stage, they have been challenged by a real grassroots, ground up movement of people who suddenly start to discover what fracking really means for them when it arrives on their doorstep. Um, and it's been a long, hard battle, and we're nowhere near over it yet, because of all of the success that local people have had in overturning planning permissions and stuff for test drilling and fracking permits. The government is now in the position where they are having to overrule local democracy in order to push these things through. And that's a very dodgy game, because the current administration that we have in office do not have a very large majority in the House of Commons. They only have about 10 or 11 people as a majority. And some of those Conservative people are anti-fracking. Their constituencies are right slam in the middle of these apparently vast reserves of gas from the fracking industry, and people are very concerned about that. It's interesting for an example, to show you what other kinds of things are going on, David Cameron, our Prime Minister's home, is in a Witney constituency, which is near to Oxford in the UK. Geographically, his constituency sits on exactly the same levels of available gas, apparently, that the geologists have worked out. However, strangely, his constituency is not being licensed for fracking. Same goes for George Osborne, the Chancellor, and all the rest of it. I think, one of the key things that happened right at the beginning of this story was that the government commissioned or produced various reports, which were the pillars that they have rested their entire case for fracking on. One of those reports was done by the Royal Society of Engineering. One was done by was a health report about health impacts of fracking, and one was a report called the Mackay-Stone report, written by a guy called David Mackay and Dr. Tim Stone. And that report essentially proves that fracking gas could be used as a bridging fuel for renewables. Now, we know you've had that same old story in the US, which is a PR invented story. And actually, what we did is we went back and looked carefully at that report. And what we discovered was actually what they'd done is, in order to take a kind of a unit of produced gas, and from that unit understand what the fugitive methane emissions were going to be coming from fracking wells. And in order to do that, they effectively took an average well in the US in terms of its production capacity, doubled it, that figure. Then they took the average methane fugitive emissions from a production well, and we know that the industry data on that is completely flawed anyway, but they took that data and they halved it. So what they came out with was a figure, even though all the maths was correct, the input data, which they failed to publish. Now, this is a British government report, right? This is what they have based their entire case on, saying that burning fracking gas is cleaner than coal, even though we've already agreed to phase out coal over the next 20 years. All those documents were signed ages ago and we're getting rid of coal. But they're saying fracking is cleaner than coal. And they've come up with this completely dodgy data to kind of prove that. And since that time, just recently, as I'm sure you're very aware of, all the evidence that's come out since the Howarth papers and stuff with regard to fugitive methane leaks, it shows completely clearly now that, in fact, the methane leakage from fracking makes fracking as an industry far worse than coal in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So hopefully, we're about to release another report on that, and if we can get that into government, and all these people who, I have to say, every time you're writing to some of these MPs and stuff who are sitting on the fence and saying, well, we don't know, it might be quite a good idea to do this fracking and stuff, and actually, we have to do it because of the imperative of climate change, right? That's why we have to have fracking, right? Actually, we can prove you that's nonsense, right? So I think for us, I'm feeling quite positive about it at the moment, and I think we have a very good chance of winning in this country because we're a much more densely populated, smaller island, and it will really affect everybody. And unfortunately, we have the malaise in the UK, as you do all over the rest of the world, where people are not really interested until it turns up on their doorstep, and then they start worrying about it, But hey, we keep on.
And speaking of keeping on, you founded the site Talk Fracking, which combines sort of these very factual aspects and stories from the front lines of affected communities, like you mentioned. And it also displays creative activism. And I know that you yourself are a creative. So talk a little bit about the role of fashion, music, and art in activism and why you feel that it plays an important role.
Well, I think what I've found along the way, when I really decided something had to be done, what I did was actually go out and employ one of these PR firms that the enemy employs, the fracking industry employs. So I thought, well, I'll play them at their own game. We'll go out and employ one of those guys, and we'll put the counter argument out in the media. And I played that game for a while, and what I discovered was that actually pretty much the mainstream media, that's everything from the Times newspaper right through to the BBC and all the rest of it, pretty much the majority of their stories are not news stories at all. They are placements put there by PR industries working on behalf of industry. And that's the truth. I've seen them smear people that they don't, that are coming out with the truth, running all kinds of funny backstories in order to then lead up to another thing, which is their real agenda. And so what I discovered was, we were spending a lot of time putting forward counter arguments, putting forward what we thought were kind of bombshells of information that were pretty much entirely ignored by the media. They just didn't want to print it. They're like, oh yeah, tell us something new. We already know, yeah, you're all complaining about that kind of stuff. Yeah, when you've got something new to give us, we might consider it. And then even if you did get something into them, it was cut so short, and it was such a kind of token gesture, whereas the main headlines was how many million barrels of oil or gas they found under the ground, and we're all going to be rich, and everyone's going to enjoy this big bonanza, And so what I found out is that the really most effective way to get into the media and get your voice across was to start to be a bit outrageous. We had to start doing stunts that were a bit ridiculous. I don't know. We took a box. We had a report, for example, that came out where one of the government's chief scientific advisors had compared the potential of fracking in the UK, saying it could end up being one of these things as adverse as asbestos or thalidomide in the future, and that it could cause, it had the potential to cause a hell of a lot of damage, and that we should tread extremely carefully. So we took a box of asbestos to David Cameron's house for Christmas. It wasn't real asbestos, a load of cotton wool or whatever, but we had to start doing those things because that was the thing that would get us media attention. Another thing we did is we drove a tank to his house and parked on his lawn, and with all the nanas or grandmas from the north of England that have run one of the most successful campaigns to date. Because they're looking after their grandkids, and you can't argue with a grandma looking after her grandkids. You just got to shut up and take it, right? So, and that scares politicians. So, I don't know. We have been quite effective in getting those headlines when we've had to, but we've had to go for this very sort of, I don't know, slightly ridiculous caricature type stunts. Trying to do them in a way that are pretty affordable but are designed to get maximum impact. And that's kind of where we've ended up. But at the same time, underpinned it with actually getting some really solid work done in terms of taking apart these reports that are produced by people with very bad intentions to hoodwink the public, that are repeated as fact then by the government or anybody else afterwards when it's clearly not a fact. But, you're then a bit too late and you're trying to catch up to actually say this isn't a fact because everyone's already sort of believed it. And I guess, I don't know, I've had a bit of a baptism of fire in understanding how this supposed democracy of ours actually works. And I can tell you, it's frightening. It's frightening. These people are out of control, behaving totally irresponsibly, if not criminally. And I don't know, I just encourage everybody to just stand up against it. You know, it's up to us to take responsibility for it in the end. I know it's really hard sometimes, and everyone's got other stuff they got to do and everything. But if we don't protect our environment and our habitat, where are we going to live?
Yeah, a good question that nobody has an answer to, but continues to do what they do. And speaking about that standing up aspect, you've spoken a lot about the lack of youth rebellion, and I mean with what we do in this show and with what I've done with my band and poetry and stuff, it's something that I focus on as well. So like what is it? Why has the world become soft, and why has the term rebellion become sort of like this cute word that's thrown around that like what and this is sort of a difficult question, of course, but what can we do to shift it? Like what can we do to engage people again?
You know, it's hard, but a lot of people are trying lots of different things. You know, I work a lot with lots of different groups here in the UK, and abroad, actually. You know, what can we do? You have to engage people. What I'm always really impressed by in the end is when I do talk to a lot of young people, they're so switched on and they really do know a lot about what's going on, but they feel kind of helpless. And so, what I always encourage people to do is to not work on their own. You know, do something with a friend, get involved with other people. You know, go on demonstrations, talk to people, fight. You know, get involved and do check things out for yourself. Don't just accept what I say or anybody else says. You know, really go and look at it for yourself. You know, to find out something, you have to spend a bit of effort. You know, don't just believe the first thing that comes to you, because that's the same thing as, you know, what the mass media give to people. You know, to have a real opinion, what is that? You know, a real opinion is when you take all the information in front of you, you try and get hold of all the facts, you look at it as a whole, you evaluate it, and then you create your own opinion about what you think about it. That's really having an opinion. Most people kind of, you know, it's one of those things that kind of annoys me. Everyone sort of jumps up and down ranting about their right to their opinion. You know, it's my right to have an opinion. Well, it is, but it's not your right to just adopt somebody else's opinion and call it your own. You know, you can't just take what it says on the front cover of the newspaper and call it your opinion. And so I think young people are in a bit of a difficult place like that because they're so distracted. You know, there was I'm sure you're familiar with the writer Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World and stuff. He said in some of his writing, he created a kind of fantasy pill medicine called Ninstol. And he said everyone had to take one a day from birth. And what it stood for, Ninstol, was nationalist idolatry, non-stop distraction, and organized lying. And he said out of the three things, the worst thing was non-stop distraction, because it stops you thinking and being able to decide or have an opinion. And that's the age that we live in. We have non-stop distraction on television, media, and but at the same time, I don't know, with social media and with the internet, people are able to access so much more information and connect with each other than they ever were before. So there's some real positivity there. And I think, you know, young people have always been great in you know, social media has happened as a consequence of young people using it. You know, that's why it's happened. That's what every brand and company wants to tap into. How do they talk to young people? How do they talk to the youth market? And I think, you know, we kind of live in a day and age where, in the end, the democracy that we have is within our wallet. You know, it's where we choose to spend our money, which brands we choose to associate with, or not spend it. You know, we all consume far too much anyway. I mean, you know, it's better not to consume so much. Better to choose things well, make them last. You know, and not to buy too much crap. But I think, you know, that's the day and age we live in, and it is a constant battle. But I am always very pleasantly surprised on a regular basis by how by meeting some young people who are really up to speed with all kinds of things and have lots of information that that I find really interesting and stuff. So I don't know. I think there's still a lot of hope out there. I do keep meeting these people all the time, but at the same time, it has to be said, I think the majority of people are kind of, their heads are in the washing machine while of distraction. And that's what I guess the shock doctrine's all about as well, isn't it? It's kind of, shocking people from time to time into believing whatever they wanted to believe.
And then, of course, it works the opposite way, as you mentioned, doing these crazy gigs, and you see the same thing with what just happened with BP pulling out of the art of the Edinburgh Festival. Like, it's because of these crazy things that people do that gets that attention. So it is sort of like a shock doctrine that we're using at the same time to do good.
Yes. Yes, I mean we have to fight back, and I guess we use the same tactics as they use. But you have to be a bit more clever because they have endless pockets of money and businesses to try to. But you have to imagine how frustrating it must be for some of these guys, right? I mean, do you know how much money they've spent here on promoting fracking? Do you know we started this thing saying, what was it? Let's talk about fracking. The shale industry then launched a whole initiative, with advertising on the back of buses and the whole helpline and a website and whatever, in the expensive way that they do everything, right? Saying, let's talk about shale. Have you got a question about shale? And so they immediately started to try to combat us by kind of copying what we were doing and going, actually, what they're doing is kind of getting through to people. We need to stop it and do this other thing. The amount of money we made them spend on all this kind of stuff, they must be very frustrated, because even though in the end, do you know what? Personally, I probably put in a couple of £100,000 to this campaign, and that's a lot of money anyway. But these people are putting in hundreds of millions of pounds. And they're nowhere nearer to convincing the British public today that fracking's good. In fact, it's gone the other way because of people like us and not just us. Do you know what? I'm a small part of this thing, but I've got quite a good ways of making of manipulating media and understanding how you can find a crack in the wall and get in there and exploit it at the right time. Timing is everything, right? And it does really bring a smile to my face sometimes to just think of the millions people have invested in trying to push this technology through, and we've held them up with pennies, relatively speaking. They must really go home and kind of cry in their soup about it, and good job too.
One can hope. So I do want to talk about the Green Party in England, and we've had Jill Stein, who's the Green Party presidential candidate, here on the show. We've had this discussion about the idea of occupying government, because here, in the Occupy movement and a lot of other movements as well, it's this idea of like anti-establishment to such an extent that you never align yourself with any party. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on this, because you've written about aligning yourself with the Green Party, but you also have this very strong anti-establishment streak. Talk about the combination of politics in terms of government and politics in terms of street protest and anti-establishment.
You have to deal with what you got in front of you, and I think I grew up in an age where we were all interested in the ideas of punk rock and anarchy, and we didn't want the establishment, and we wanted to get rid of the Queen, and we want to get rid of the government, and I don't know, just kind of ideas that you believe in at a time when you're so fed up with what the establishment has to offer, and you're just so sick of it. We used to call it generation no future, i.e. people didn't feel they had a future. And I think there are so many parallels from that time to today. I mean, what's a young person's future today? We're destroying our environment at a rate of knots. You can't, I live in London. I mean, Do you know how expensive it is for someone to even live in London? I mean, there's people living 10 to a room. You know, I mean, it's a joke. What future do these people have? And I think, you know, you've got, you know, Green Party or not. I've tried to work with the Green Party, and, you know, bless them. I love Caroline Lucas. She's the one Green MP that we've got. She does some really good stuff. But actually, the rest of the Green Party are pissing around. I don't know what they're doing. You couldn't trust them to organise anything. You know, I've tried. You know, I'm bored of the Green Party. I'm sick of talking about that kind of thing. They're never going to get off their arse and do anything. I think the biggest hope, actually, personally, at the moment that we have here is probably Jeremy Corbyn from the Labour Party, just because he's actually what Labour was always about, and he has a track record of sticking by his principles and really, you know, fighting on behalf of people, not on behalf of corporations. A lot of the solutions to what we need to do are very simple. They're not complicated, but the complicated thing is about corporations. We focus very much on democracy and what we can do to, you know, to improve it. The fact is, with things like TTIP and all the rest of it, you ain't going to have any democracy. Forget it. It's gone. You know, there's secret courts and, you know, by lawyers from corporations that are going to decide everything. And people keep sort of focusing on this, you know, what are you going to do with the Green Party? And you're too late, mate. Too late. You've got to take on the corporations where it hurts, and that's in their wallet. You know, you've got to stop buying this stuff. You got to, you know, it's the only thing you can do. I mean, these oil companies and petrochemical companies, fracking companies, I have to say that they're either the dinosaur that's dying out, or they're going to kill us all. That's the choice people have got, you know. And let's just kill them off. You know, we people in this country always talk about things like the NHS, our free health service over here and stuff. You know what? It's so easy to fix the NHS. All they have to do is get Big Pharma out of the NHS and change the laws so that we do not respect copyright on drugs, just like in India. You know, that we would have so much money to put into healthcare, it would be insane. That's just one thing they need to do. Get rid of copyright on healthcare. Everybody says, oh, yeah, but if you do that, then there won't be any research and development. I mean, you and I'm sure your listeners know the truth that actually only 10% of research and development is actually paid for by pharmaceutical companies. The other 90% is paid for by taxpayers across the world in various countries. Why the hell we have to, you know, buy drugs from these companies at enormously inflated prices is beyond me. I mean, if we just stop that law, half the problems of this country would be over. It's not that difficult. It's just having the political will to do it. And I think the only real chance we've got at the moment is Jeremy Corbyn and perhaps in the United States, Bernie Sanders. But it's a tough road, you know, and a long hill to climb. But to be honest with you, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, could you imagine of someone like Bernie Sanders actually even being in the race? I mean, I couldn't imagine it. Jeremy Corbyn, and at the same time as we had the hideous Tony Blair. I mean, it wouldn't have happened. People weren't ready for it. I think a lot more people are ready for it now. People understand that the capitalist system dominated by these corporations, that those guys don't even believe it's working. You know, they don't believe it's working anymore. They're investing in things that are a bubble and a fantasy. You know, it's they can't keep talking about renewable energy being too expensive. What does that mean? Too expensive for what? What, like death or renewable energy? I mean, what are you talking about? So, you know, and even now, the city and the financial people, they're realizing actually solar's cheaper than coal, solar's cheaper than gas because the price has come down so much. They can't. The old mechanisms are no longer beginning are no longer working. And I think that a lot of people are realizing that now.
So finally, I just want to ask what is next, not only for your own endeavors, but what do you feel is next for the fracking and perhaps even the environmental movement as a whole? Like, how do we keep pushing the capitalist system away from this endless extraction?
I have to say, I think I've got a really strong feeling that fracking is dead in the water in the UK. If it's dead in the water in the UK, it's dead in the water everywhere else that's thinking about doing it. Not in the US, because unfortunately you have a system out there where these people can just go and do all this stuff without ever kind of having to pay for it, or having to answer for it. And I feel you have some of the most beautiful landscapes on the planet in the United States of America. And I'm sorry, but you guys over there have let these people shit all over them. And I don't know. They need to be made to pay for it. But I think in the UK, we're going to carry on. If they have a government minister now override the local planning decision, all that's going to mean is that every other place where people are fracking is coming, people are going to be demonstrating more. They're going to be there on the street. They're going to be tying themselves to the trucks. They're going to be not wanting to live there. They're going to be trying to sell their homes. It's going to turn into a very quick spiral that people are going to just say, we don't want this thing here. We don't need it. We don't want it. And that's the key thing, is we don't need it. We don't need the gas. I've heard every story in the media. They tried to say, we need this gas because Putin has got all the gas and he's going to turn the taps off, and we've got to protect ourselves from Russia and the Russian gas. I mean, it's just a joke. We don't even import any gas from Russia. We import some gas through Europe, and I think about something like 1.5% of that gas that we import through Europe comes from Russia originally. It's nothing. And I think when people start to understand that they've been lied to, they get very angry about it, and justifiably so. And the government's playing a very tricky game here. This is not something that that is party political. This is something that crosses all political divides. People are uniting together against fracking. You've got conservatives, Labour people, all kind of political persuasions, all against it. Conservatives would play a very, very difficult, a very dodgy game there. If some of their main staunch conservative constituencies that continually vote for them, because that's what people do, isn't it? You're a Republican, you're always a Republican. You're a Democrat, you're always a Democrat. You're Labour, all nonsense, we know. Do you know what I mean? Because the reality is, what's the difference between Obama and Clinton and Bush? Nothing. What's the difference between Tony Blair and whoever, Cameron, pig head fucker? I mean, nothing, right? So, if they alienate their core voters, they're in trouble. And I think that they've got all the PR story they've pushed behind it. They keep doing these tests and polls. They found out that actually, women tend to be against fracking more than men in a poll. So what did they do? They went and appointed a woman as the head of the UK oil and gas fracking front company. So that women would respond to them. It's so cynical, and people can spot it so easily. It's just not working, and all their efforts, actually less people like it now today than when they started this whole effort. So I don't know. I think they're on a losing streak with that, because at the same time you have other countries like Germany, and if you're European, one thing you understand if you live in Europe is that Germany is actually the kind of industrial and economic heart of Europe, right? They don't have a great big war machine. They learned that after the Second World War. It's less of a war economy in Germany than everywhere else in the world. And they have gone hook, line, and sinker for renewable energy, and that's why, because they're stupid. I mean, they banned fracking in the state of New York, where Dimmock or whatever, where it was started. I mean, France, they might do what we're going to start doing it. Once you start to engage people in the real arguments, and you have to understand, when I started this campaign, I mean, my initial drive was to say, this isn't really about anti-fracking. This is about pro-democracy. All we've heard is about the positive effects of fracking and stuff. And actually, what we'd like is a real debate. We would like the fracking industry to put forward their best speakers. We will find matching speakers. We're going to tour around the country. We're going to rent halls and places. We're going to leaflet before we go there. We're going to put advertising in local newspapers. We're going to push it all out over the internet, and we're going to invite people to come to a real debate. Not one of the people from the fracking industry would stand up and come and debate with us. We ended up having all these gigs where we only had one panel, and in the end, people kind of noticed, and they went, why won't these people turn up and talk about it? Because they know they're going to lose. And so they won't even turn up. And then you get them on the run a bit, and they don't know what to do, They have you heard of this guy, the Frack Man or something? What's it? Some lunatic American bloke from Las Vegas or whatever. That was the best shot they had. Have you ever come across this guy?
No.
The Frackmeister or something. I don't know what he's called. It was some guy from the porno industry in Las Vegas that now is the kind of bulldog, aggressive, pro-fracking guy that they send out to talk to the media on behalf of the fracking industry. You couldn't pick a worse guy. I mean, nobody over here would respond to that guy and think that fracking was good. Everyone would just think, what an arsehole. British people are quite like that. They're not impressed by people like that at all. It was like the biggest PR flop that the frackers could do.
Well, that's actually, and final thing before we finish, but I do want to know, because obviously you see the U.S. from the outside, and I grew up in Europe as well, so I sort of still do, but I've been here for a long time. I think what Americans oftentimes lack is that outside perspective, because we don't look for it, we don't care, we don't even know where England is on a map. Talk a little bit about, like, how do you see what we're doing? And how do you see that we could learn from other people, perhaps Germany or perhaps what you were doing, to hold these people responsible and stop listening to people like Hillary, who takes billions from fracking companies, or like this guy, the porno PR guy?
What do you do? God, I mean, you got to keep on doing what you're doing. The problem, I'm afraid to say, is that the vast majority of American people are so dumbed down. They just watch TV all day and get fat, and I don't know what you're going to do about them people. Stop them eating. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what you're going to do about it. Sometimes I stay awake at night thinking about this kind of stuff, and I can't sleep, and I can't think, God, what the hell are we going to do? The world is full of people that don't care, don't know, uninformed, don't look at themselves, accept everything they're told. I don't know what you're going to do with those people. As I said, I think cut off their food or something, make them go do I don't know. Do something. Go and picket their house and tell them to turn the TV off. Throw your TVs out the window. That's what I would do as a start. I haven't had television in 10 years in my house. I won't have it. And I don't shop at supermarkets. And what are you going to do? I don't know. There's a start.
Basically, just get out information and creatively.
You can get out all the information you like, but if nobody's listening to it, then you've got to kind of think about other strategies. I've been in touch with some of those people. In fact, we had a great girl from Pennsylvania, Liz Arnold, come over and join us on the fracking tour that we did, the debating tour in the UK. And she's, been in touch periodically about stuff that's going on in Pennsylvania. And there's some amazing people out there doing some amazing work and getting stuff out. But I don't know, America's so big, and you have these presidential campaigns that go on and on and on, like this big theatre thing. I'll never forget that one a couple of years ago. Who was that guy that had all the makeup running down his face? Oh, yeah, he was against Obama, wasn't he? This Obama statesman guy, yes, we can, and everything. And it was just ridiculous. I was just going, this is like a soap opera. And that's exactly what it is. It's exactly what it is. You want to watch, then you're in the soap opera. I don't know, but unfortunately, the reality is that the trucks suddenly arrive, and then they're fracking next year, and you didn't know it, and whatever. I mean, you got some fun. The thing is, you guys actually have a constitution, and it's broken all the time, and no one does anything about it. I don't know. What can I say? You have a law. Hold these people to account. The problem is it costs millions and millions and millions to get any justice. You want to take someone to court, you want to sue them, yeah, millions and millions of dollars later, years and years later. I mean, it's just, and they know that. They could create a system around that, but they had problems. They had problems. And as I said, sometimes, if you're, timing is everything. And if you're able to identify the door, identify the window that you can go through in that timing, you can be very cost effective at creating something massive, and that's media manipulation. And I guess you've got to play them at their game, but it's a very tough game to do. And I think probably tougher in the United States than it is over here. Just simply because of the geographical size of where you are and how many people and languages and, I don't know. It's a tough game, but I guess if you're right in your head and you're kind of doing the right thing and you can see what you're fighting against is causing so much damage and destruction, you'll just keep on doing it and hopefully you'll get somewhere. That Bernie Sanders seems like a pretty switched on guy. At least he's challenging that nightmare person, Hillary Clinton. And God, what is this Donald Trump guy? I mean, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. I don't know. This is politics. Is this real? Is it actually real? I mean,
I think it might be a nightmare that we'll all wake up from soon, but unfortunately, that's probably not the case. And in the meantime, we're the laughingstock and the horror of the entire world. So.
No, and it must feel really kind of disappointing that all the time. But you have to, I think, understand in some ways, that, I don't know, America has always been held up as such a kind of example of freedom and liberty and stuff, and it's all become very I don't know, twisted, and it doesn't really mean that anymore. I don't know whether it ever really did. But people, I think, when they left Europe to go to America originally, had such dreams and hopes, and were escaping from some horrible things in Europe and in other countries to go somewhere where they felt they could be free. The problem was it was already occupied by somebody else. I don't know if Americans have ever really got over that, but there's some great people in America, great writers. Don't think that all British people think of Americans as arseholes. We don't. We really don't. There've been some amazing literature, art, all kinds of things come out of the United States, which have been extremely positive. But you've got a lot of people that are very uninformed and dumbed down and don't know what to do. But you've got a lot of smart people too, so I don't know.
Just keep trying. Keep pushing stuff like this out there.
You get smarter and you start to win more, I think.